Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Ellen Fanning. Coming up, Attorney General Christian Porter has identified himself as the minister accused of raping a teenage friend decades ago, emphatically rejecting the allegation.
The only information I have about the allegations is what has been circulating online and in certain media outlets.
Speaking truth to power, Australian of the Year and sexual assault survivor Tame tells her story to the National Press Club. And growing up too fast as the adults in the room grapple with the big issues, how can we help our girls navigate these difficult areas? Joining me on the panel tonight, Executive Director of Parenthood and contributing editor of Women's Agenda, Georgie Gent. Lovely to see you. Managing Editor of superannuation fund Crescent Wealth, TALAL YASSINE. Hey, TALAL.
Hello.
In Brisbane, author and journalist MADONNA King. Thanks for being with us, Madonna. And
Pleasure.
in Mackay tonight, General Manager of Eaton Irrigation and former New South Wales Nationals MP, Austin Evans. Lovely to see you this year.
Thanks, Ellen.
And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum, and we are on Facebook. The Attorney General, Christian Porter, has revealed that he is the Cabinet Minister against whom an historic rape allegation has been made. It's an allegation he has forcefully denied.
Prior to last Friday's story in the ABC, no one in law enforcement or the law or politics or the media ever put any substance of any specific allegations to me at all. Had the accusation ever been put to me before they were printed, I would have at least been able to say the only thing that I can say, and likely the only thing that I'm ever going to be able to say, and it's the truth, and that is that nothing in the allegations that have been printed ever happened.
The alleged victim took her life last year, and Mr Porter confirmed that he knew her in 1988 when they were both taking part in a debating competition. But he claims he only heard rumours of the allegations last November.
Before last Friday, all I can say is that I had heard, I think about November last year, a rumour that was being spread by a small number of people that I had somehow offended against someone decades ago in a way that was never specified to me. All of this has happened, and I have never been contacted in any substantive form by anyone putting to me the details of what appears is now being alleged against me. No one put anything in any detail to me seeking a response.
He says he won't be standing down, but will be taking a short period of mental health leave.
If I stand down from my position as Attorney General because of an allegation about something that simply did not happen, then any person in Australia can lose their career, their job, their life's work based on nothing more than an accusation that appears in print. If that happens, anyone in public life is able to be removed simply by the printing of an allegation. Every child we raise can have their lives destroyed by online reporting of accusations alone.
For more on this, we're joined in Canberra by political reporter for The Guardian Australia, Amy REMEIKIS. Amy, thanks for being with us. Can I just acknowledge this is an extraordinary difficult time for survivors of sexual assault like yourself, and that you've had to continue to talk and write about it, and that you have the strength to do so, and we're very grateful that you could make time for us tonight.
Oh, thank you. That's quite lovely.
Can I start by asking you to tell me how much detail was put to Christian Porter in that press conference about the allegations contained in that lengthy dossier that was sent to the Prime Minister and various other MPs last week, and how much detail did he go into refuting those allegations?
Almost all of the detail that we know has been published from the document which contains the allegations was put to Christian Porter in that press conference. He was asked whether there was any consensual sex acts with the woman, if there was any recollection he had of any intimacy with the woman, and he said no, it never happened to all of it. It was a categorical denial. He said that he'd met her during a school event in 1988, but he had not been in contact with her since there, and there was no relationship.
Okay, and he was also said continuously that it was 33 years ago and he doesn't have a clear recollection of it. But he was able to recall certain things that happened, innocuous things that happened, through that time, including that she ironed a shirt for him. Is that right?
Yes, he was. And that was, again, because that was one of the published allegations, because Christian Porter says he has not seen the document that contains the allegations, he only knows what has been in the media. And one of those was that when, while she was ironing a shirt for Christian Porter, he made a comment that she would make someone a very nice wife someday. So he said he remembered that he believed that the woman taught himself and two other people who were there as part of this school event how to iron a shirt because they hadn't done it before. He remembers a dinner because there was a bowl of prawns at the dinner, and he remembers that. He's not sure if they went dancing afterwards, but he says that is possible. So his recollections of the time 33 years ago do seem to be linked to certain events and certain actions.
And for clarity, he wasn't sure whether he'd made that comment about whether she'd make somebody a nice wife. Georgie, can I turn to you? You've written a lot about this. You've looked at what the Prime Minister said, and you're very much across all the detail of how this has unfolded. Were you surprised that the Minister, Christian Porter, stood up in a press conference for 42 minutes and had not examined the dossier that had been sent to the Prime Minister's office that detailed the allegations against him?
I was quite shocked by the revelation by the Attorney-General that when he was presented with news of these allegations by the Prime Minister on Wednesday, he didn't read the contents of the report. Now, on Monday, when the Prime Minister himself answered questions at a press conference on this, he also made that comment that he had been briefed on its contents, but he hadn't read it. Now, I was a lawyer briefly for literally 30 seconds in my career, and one of the things that I think many lawyers will relate to is that lawyers are across details. Now, I find it really difficult to believe that a trained lawyer, as Christian Porter said today, he was a prosecutor for a long time, he's been a legal officer for a long time, he is the Attorney-General of this country. And if in a meeting with the Prime Minister where very serious criminal allegations are being laid out, in a document, I haven't seen the document, but my understanding is that it is quite a lengthy, substantive document. It is not just a sort of, two-sentence anonymous tweet. It is a dossier compiled. And the idea that neither the Prime Minister or the Attorney-General in that instance thought it necessary to get across the details, I find quite implausible. And I think that if that is genuinely the case, if neither the Prime Minister or the Attorney-General saw fit to read these allegations, I think that explains the response that we're getting, that if they genuinely thought the contents of that report were not relevant to them as the highest, holders of the highest office in Australia, it wasn't necessary for them to read. I'm not surprised that we haven't seen any action.
Madonna, can I turn to you? Christian Porter said very clearly no one had ever brought these allegations to him. Now, I haven't been able to ring the journalists involved and ask them what allegations they put to him before publication, but just your response to that yes, the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office had a copy of this lengthy dossier. One imagines the Attorney-General could have asked for it, but in fact no one has brought it directly to his attention.
Yeah, I struggle to believe genuinely that he hasn't seen that dossier if it was available to him. I also struggle to believe that the allegations weren't raised with him. I don't think that changes his absolute vehement denial, though, whether or not he read it. And I think if we take a step back, he's saying whatever he was told and any other detail, it did not happen. And he can't say that any more clearly than he has. Whether we believe him is another issue, but he, the highest legal officer in the land, has held an extraordinary press conference, and he cannot be clearer in his denial, can he? And that then makes it difficult when you go to talk about, independent inquiries and police inquiries or whatever, because you have something that is 33 years old. You have a complainant or a victim who is no longer able to put their side of the story, and you have the highest law officer in the land saying this did not happen. And I think that makes it very difficult, whether it's today or in 3 weeks or in 3 months, to get to the bottom of this specific incident, but it doesn't mean there is a broader issue here that warrants investigation.
Amy REMEIKIS, can I turn to you? Apparently 2 journalists have come out and said now that they did take the allegations to Christian Porter, I am told. Do you know anything? They took it to his office. There we are, there's a distinction. What's your reaction to that?
Well, we've had several journalists come out and say that they had made attempts to take allegations that had been raised to Christian Porter's office. And we know from that press conference that he denied that he'd ever had it raised with him. We also know that people have said on social media openly, we have tried to contact them about this. And I know journalists personally who have also tried to contact his office about it, but he was very careful with his language there, as he always is very careful with his language. On the point of the dossier, on the Wednesday when Christian Porter spoke to Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister did not have the documents at that time. He said that publicly on Monday. He said that he knew that the documents were coming. He had spoken to the AFP Commissioner about what to do when they arrived, which is why we got that letter released from the AFP Commissioner Reece Kershaw, saying if you receive any information, your first port of call is to refer it to the police immediately. So when Scott Morrison held his first meeting with Christian Porter on Wednesday, he did not have the dossier. Scott Morrison said he received it later, but as Georgie has said, he did not read it when he received it.
Can I turn to you, Austin Evans? You don't think that the Attorney General should stand down after this period of mental health leave. Take me through why. I mean, it's such a challenging situation, but take me through why you think that.
I'm not sure I'm that black and white about it.
Okay.
But look, it's a very difficult situation. Probably my initial reaction is that he shouldn't, unless there's some more developments or something that warrant it. But you know, it's a very tough situation to be able to progress on that from where we are, as you covered in your intro. So I think as we stand right now, I think, look, I'll be surprised if he does. He sounds like he's wanting to stick around. I don't know whether there's the impetus to push him. Yeah, I don't think he will be.
Talal, what about the idea of an independent inquiry? I mean, Christian Porter said today, if I stand down, and he's, to be fair, he's being asked to stand aside pending an independent investigation. But if I stand down as Attorney General, it sets a new standard. In fact, he said we wouldn't need an Attorney General as there'd be no rule of law left in this country to protect. So he's basically saying if he's forced to stand down on the basis of an allegation, it sort of sets a chilling new standard in politics. Do you think, is that true? Is that an exaggeration?
I think it's a very fraught situation, and I think he's in a very difficult spot, whichever way you look at it. The problem is a criminal charge attached to this, and the person who would partake and who could actually agitate or have some evidence is no longer with us. It's not whether he's a minister of government or not, it's the fact that where do you go to from here? And so standing down is very common in most areas, but in any area, whether you were privately employed by government, a minister of the Crown no less, there needs to be a potential for you to be charged, and there's not even a statement here.
Or for some resolution, surely, Georgie.
Well, yeah, because I think what we have to be really careful about here is the evidentiary burden in a criminal trial is very different from the evidentiary burden that might necessitate an independent investigation, or at least further investigations taking place.
So what would that look like, given that the woman who made the allegations in some detail has sadly died and is no longer available to give evidence? So what would that look like?
Well, my view is that, and I listened to Christian Porter offer those words of sympathy to the victim's family and to her loved ones. And I thought, in this instance, as Attorney General, if he is interested in delivering some dignity to her loved ones and her parents, and if he's interested in delivering confidence in our justice system and in power being used appropriately, I think it would be incredibly generous and dignified for him to encourage the instigation of an independent inquiry to see whether or not there are questions to answer. I don't think that the inquiry needs to look at, is he criminally responsible for these charges? I think the Attorney-General, the standard of conduct that we can require is higher than just not committing a crime.
Can I say that?
I think misconduct...
to about that, and I absolutely agree from a dignity and honour perspective, but I think it points to the broader issue of what the Prime Minister can do tomorrow. What Christian Porter should very much do, as Georgina is suggesting, because he has the highest standard.
He should stand down.
He should stand down and say, as the Chief Legal Officer of this country, I believe in the system, I've done nothing wrong, and I'll stand down. And it doesn't set the standard he suggests. But the
You
government,
don't think so? The notion that there'd be no rule of law left.
Exactly.
That there'd be
I think that's an exaggeration.
Right.
However, I think the Prime Minister should send a very strong message. I think this is a moment of national significance. Nearly, or alongside what happened in Tasmania with the gun buyback and what John Howard did. This is a very important moment of national significance. There's been a number of allegations of things happening around the parliamentary party, around power, and about sexual assaults. And so the opportunity is for the Prime Minister to stand up tomorrow and say, first of all, women have a right to safety and security, and that will be respected. The community has an obligation to protect that safety and security, and I, as your Prime Minister, declare this to be of national significance with an action plan. Now, that is the general tone of all this, without getting into the whys and why fors and what to do with this fraught situation, is to deal with it in the way Georgina's suggesting, because it is a difficult situation, but to actually declare the position without equivocation. I think that's the important issue.
Madonna?
I think that we need to be clear what we are asking for here, whether it's an inquiry into Christian Porter's conduct or alleged conduct, whether it's an inquiry into the culture at Parliament House, or Ellen, whether it's an inquiry into the fact that hundreds of schoolgirls have put their name to sexual assault accusations against boys, predominantly from all boys' schools across Australia. And we're focusing on one case, and yes, he is the highest law officer in the land, and yes, it is absolutely crucial. But what breaks my heart is what principals in schools across Australia are talking about today, that so many girls have been brave enough to say that they have faced these sexual assaults, and where is the political leadership? In fact, where is any leadership in relation to that? So if we're going to have an inquiry, let's have an inquiry that looks at the total issue, or if we want it into Parliament, let's have it into Parliament. But I think at the moment we've got a paintbrush and we're just throwing it at a wall rather than deciding what do we want to fix here and how do we go about fixing it?
Amy, is there any will? I mean, this has been a very strange moment politically. You know, Labor hasn't been very loud on this. Other parties haven't been very loud on this. Individual MPs have been. But there is almost a sense of quiet and silence around all of this. And it seems from the comments tonight that there is no sense of resolution with this issue, despite the very firm denials from Christian Porter today.
There absolutely isn't resolution, and there has been silence, and it has been screamingly deafening. And I think part of the reason for that silence is because it is a very, very uncomfortable topic for people to be talking about. Nobody is comfortable talking about these issues, and it's not just in the Parliament, it's across society. But we have reached a situation where we have had all different types of society, aspects of society, deal with this. We've seen it in the sporting world, in the entertainment world, in media, in the corporate world, in schools. There has been a reckoning, and that has not come to Parliament until now. And I think what has been absolutely clear is that the people who lead the nation on all political sides have no idea how to navigate this, because they do think of it very, very politically. But it is simple. You have an allegation that has been made against the Attorney General. He is the highest law officer in the land. He has categorically denied those allegations. You can have an inquiry that doesn't lead to him losing his job or him being tarred with some brush, but you have an inquiry so people have faith in the system, so people know that their voices are going to be heard and going to be treated seriously. Because why does a denial, why is that louder than someone saying this happened to me? And the Parliament hasn't worked out how to deal with that. And if they can't, how do we expect anybody else to move forward on it?
Yeah, and look, Ellen, what I would say in relation to what Amy and Madonna have both just said, and to Madonna's question of what is our ask, I think the ask is very clear here. We do want more than one thing because we are dealing with a systemic problem. And we want an independent inquiry into these allegations against the Attorney General. We also want an independent inquiry into sexual harassment and sexual assault inside Parliament House. We also want a response to the systemic sexism that is entrenched in Australian society. And I think it is relevant to say that a moment of reckoning is upon us. In the last few days, a woman from Brisbane, Janine Hendry, who's never been involved in anything politically in her life, sent out a tweet and asked if women would be interested in going to Canberra on the 15th of March when Parliament resumes as a show of solidarity to say we have had enough. And in less than 48 hours, they've got 10,000 people on Facebook, and this is happening, and these women, we are angry. Men and women. I think this is, as Tenille said, this is a profound moment in Australia's history. I think we are having a moment where people that have been previously unaffected or previously unaware of the extent to which this sexism and sexual assault and sexual violence is ruining lives. And I think, it's interesting that the Attorney General did talk about, someone's life potentially being ruined by an allegation. Let's look at the lives that have been ruined by sexual violence. Let's look at the jobs that have been lost, even just in the last 3 months in Australia. Let's look at what happened to Brittany Higgins. Let's look at what happened to Brittany Higgins' partner. Let's look at our Australian of the Year, Grace Tame. Let's see how their lives have been affected by something that was completely unexpected for them too, and that was having violence perpetrated against them.
I'll come to you, Madonna. I can see that you want to say something, but just on the point of Grace Tame, let's listen to Grace Tame. As we've been saying, in time we'll probably come to recognise this last month as some sort of watershed, a moment that began with Grace Tame winning Australian of the Year, then went on to the allegations made by Brittany Higgins and now to here. Just hours before all this happened, Grace Tame spoke at the National Press Club, addressing her experience of sexual assault and the allegations that have been circulating through Parliament in recent months.
After all this, it became quite obvious to me why child sexual abuse remains ubiquitous in our society. Because while predators retain the power to get exactly what they want, to feign remorse and to objectify their targets through free speech, the innocent, survivors and bystanders alike, are burdened by shame-induced silence.
She was also asked about the way the Prime Minister has handled the events of the last few weeks.
When the Prime Minister responded to these first set of allegations, he used the phrase, as a father, and he said he had to have a chat with his wife, Jenny, before he was able to, front the media and speak. What do you make of that, and what do you make of the rhetoric and the way he's handled those allegations?
It shouldn't take having children to have a conscience. And actually, on top of that, having children doesn't guarantee a conscience.
Blistering clarity. Amy, you were in the room. Wow. What was the response?
You could have heard a pin drop, and there's a gap in between the two statements that she makes, and that is because everyone was hanging on to every single word that Grace Tame uttered, and rightly so, because she has been such an eloquent and strong voice in the midst of all of this, in telling people that they are believed and they are being listened to, and that survivors have a right to take up space. Now, we had the Prime Minister when Parliament sat during International Women's Day. They had an event here in Parliament, and he gave a speech where he said the word respect 42 times, and the theme of the speech was to respect, protect and reflect, and he said we need to do that for women. We need to think about, how we create safe spaces for women and allow their voices to be heard. But we have seen in practice that has not happened. There has been nowhere addressing the structural issues that have allowed environments to spring up. There has been nothing about taking responsibility. There has been nothing about we're going to investigate these issues independently from the Parliament. It has been very, very political. And then you have Grace Tame stand up and say, in something that would have been very difficult for her to say, because this is a woman who has had to relive her trauma and her story in order for other survivors to be heard, to stand up and rebuke the Prime Minister on behalf of a huge section of society that is asking him to step up. It shouldn't just be left to Grace Tame. It should be something that everyone, including the Prime Minister's colleagues, should be asking him to do.
Austin, I want to go to you on that one. A dignified young woman, as Amy puts it, saying, step up, Prime Minister.
Yeah, look, and I think that's the only way we're going to get change. It's not one person doing it. It's not just the government doing it. They need to lead, and we all, as a society, as a culture, we need to all step up, because that's the only way you're going to bring about change. I mean, so much of the problems in this area are part of the society and the culture as well. We've got to change those things in the culture so that the people, women in particular, feel empowered and don't feel shame or any of those sort of things that often get in the way of this, and we need to deal with men and boys having respect and treating people decently. It's not, everyone has to step up. Me, my children, my family, everyone.
Madonna, the Prime Minister's defence, when the suggestion was made that he's bungled his response, certainly to the Brittany Higgins matter, was that he didn't know about it. In relation to the allegations against Christian Porter, strongly denied. He said he heard the rumour but he didn't ask about it when he was sent the dossier with the allegations against Christian Porter, which Christian Porter denies. The Prime Minister didn't read them. He didn't know, he didn't ask, he didn't read them.
Yeah, so on any measure, that's pretty shabby leadership, isn't it? But, he still can turn this around. He just has to have the guts to say that he's got it wrong, to read the room, to listen to that extraordinary speech today and what Amy was saying just previously. But, it is a massive challenge, Ellen. I wrote a column for the New Daily about this last week and about Brittany and about the 500 schoolgirls. And I reckon at least half the emails I received were from people, predominantly women, asking, can I really have that argument when the girls were drunk or out late or blaming the victim? And I don't know how we go to stop that kind of view, which I think is an undercurrent here. So we're arguing about this vehemently and all passionate about it, but I wonder if out there is this simmering view still that some women ask for it. And I find that heartbreaking, but I don't know how any kind of inquiry, I think, has to be able to deliver an education and an understanding so that is not the viewpoint at boys' schools or for any cohort of the population.
Amy, this is really hard for you. I can see looking at your face this is really hard for you. And I guess it's the distinction between leading and following, right?
It is, and it is also about rhetoric from our leaders as well. I mean, we heard the Prime Minister say that he needed his wife to clarify it. We heard the Prime Minister say that he needed to think of his daughters in order to be able to make sense of what action needed to be taken. We had the Home Affairs Minister refer to not knowing the he said, she said part of the allegations in terms of Brittany Higgins. We had the commander of the ADF today reported in the Canberra Times saying that, women, in particular, women cadets of the ADF needed to make sure that they weren't attractive, alone and drunk in places. This is a leadership issue, and anyone anyone who is thinking that she shouldn't have been walking there late at night, or she shouldn't have got that drunk, or she shouldn't have put that in that situation, I am going to ask you to think about what would happen if it was somebody you know, and whether you would still ask those questions. And we shouldn't have to think about someone else that we know. We should not need to put someone else's face onto this situation in order to think clearly about it and have empathy. But if that's the way that you learn, then think about it. Is that person still to blame? And you're going to come up with the answer that everyone in that situation grapples with, which is no. The only thing, anything that has happened to these people who have been through sexual assault is they have come across the path of a sexual assaulter. And until you start to reverse that thinking, until you start thinking, why did that person feel like they had ownership over another person and they could take what they wanted, rather than what was that person doing in that situation, we are going to continue having these conversations, and we are going to continue to hear from schoolgirls in particular talking about the horrendous situations that they're being put in as teenagers, and you just need to stop it.
Let me say, Amy, you're wonderful. Thank you for the power of your advocacy and your eloquence. I know that you are in the middle of a shift and you have to run off and leave us. I cannot believe that we've put you through all of that.
No,
and you've
you
got to
haven't.
turn around
I've just been crying for frigging, weeks about all of it. But thank you for being so sensitive, and to everyone who is watching. I know that this is difficult, and I know that these are really uncomfortable conversations, but just support those around you, because it is really, really tough, but we need to have them. As Grace Tame said, sometimes we need that ugliness and darkness to lead us into the light, and this is one of those moments.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Amy.
Appreciate it. Amy REMEIKIS, political reporter for The Guardian Australia. Tough day. Let me just raise this before we move on. You referenced this in a column that you wrote. On Monday, when questioned on the allegations relating to Christian Porter, the Prime Minister said that we were kidding ourselves if we thought this issue was unique to Parliament House. That might be true, but what's unique to the PM and him alone is what he can do about it, like legislation, for instance. His government has been sitting on a landmark report that could revolutionise workplaces. This time a year ago, the Sex Discrimination Commission released advice that the government make two key changes: legally compel employers to take measures to eliminate sex discrimination, harassment and victimisation, and two, amend the definition of serious misconduct in the workplace to include sexual harassment, because, as things stand, it currently isn't. Then his position as a workplace leader, the Prime Minister. As Georgie said earlier, when asked about the letter he received outlining the allegations against Christian Porter, the Prime Minister said he didn't read it, although he'd been briefed on the contents, that he ignored the rumours, as we've said, of matters dating back from last year. So as a legislator, he was asked a year ago, the Parliament was asked a year ago, to make these changes, to compel workplaces to take positive steps to eliminate this behaviour. And to change the Fair Work Act to say two things. If somebody comes back at you and you've dismissed them for sexual harassment, and they say that's unfair dismissal, that sexual harassment is good grounds for it. So that means that the HR department that's having a nervy about the unfair dismissal claim will calm down a bit. And secondly, that it's a serious misconduct, sexual discrimination, that he hasn't done those two things. And then what we're saying about the whole of the Parliament, what the view of the panel seems to be is, nor are they taking the sort of leadership that those laws would require.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the comments that Scott Morrison made, because this was when a number of other allegations came out about the same senior staffer who allegedly assaulted Brittany Higgins, when multiple more women came forward, and he was asked about it, and he said, he was asked generally about sexual harassment and assault inside Parliament House, and he, I think, attempted to deflect and say, if you think this is only an issue in Parliament House, you're kidding yourselves. And I was quite taken aback by those remarks, because I was one of the people, like a lot of other people, who eagerly awaited Kate Jenkins handing down that landmark report after a comprehensive investigation. And it was ignored. And I immediately put that question on Twitter to the Prime Minister and said, if you recognise that sexual harassment in our workplaces is prolific, which it is, Why have you not done anything about it? You have not actioned a single item from that report. And I think that this goes to the bigger picture that we're talking about, that Amy and Madonna have referenced here. When we talk about young men and young boys in schools treating women in the way these young girls are telling us about, and when we see these allegations of what's happening in Parliament House, in Minister's office, by senior staffers, and we see the way the Prime Minister attempts to dismiss and minimise the humanity of a woman like Brittany Higgins, or a woman like the woman who we now know has died, who alleges that she was raped by the Attorney General. When we look at that lack of humanity and we look at that lack of respect and that disregard for women, is it really surprising to us to discover that young boys are having trouble with respect? Because in my view, the issue is not here having an educational program just about consent. I think the educational program we need is what gives young boys, old men, middle-aged men, what gives them the impression that they are entitled to violate the body of another human being? And I think we have to be really honest that the reason a lot of men, young and old, feel empowered to do that is because they have been getting away with it for so long. And because that is what's being modelled in too many houses, in too many workplaces, in Parliament House. That is the message, that is the modelling we're seeing. So let's not be surprised then when we have horrific allegations like this, and then let's not be surprised when there is an uprising of women who say to the Attorney General, your word that you didn't do it is not sufficient to alleviate the concerns of survivors and allies around this country who are saying it is time for there to be actual legitimate consequences for victims, for perpetrators of sexual violence. And perpetrators, at the very least, should not be policymakers.
And again, I'll state that Christian Porter has very forcefully said that these allegations are denied, that these things didn't happen. Can I ask you, Talal?
Sure.
The Prime Minister's view was that this is a matter for the police. When asked whether he believed Christian Porter, he said it doesn't matter whether I believe him, it's whether it's for the police to believe him or not to believe him. Laura Tingle last night on 7:30 said, no, you need to answer that question, Prime Minister. Do you accept as a workplace leader that if you have a criminal allegation that that's something for the police to deal with, and if they can't, that's the end of it, and it's nothing for the workplace leader to be dealing with?
Well, I don't accept that at all, the Prime Minister's position, because I may be a workplace leader, he's the leader of the nation. What he does, what he says, how he acts it shapes the nation. And whether, Christian Porter, these allegations are true or not, and they're fraught, is not, as I said before, it's not just about this matter. It's about all the things Georgina's saying, all the things Madonna's saying, all the things Amy's saying. The evidence is overwhelming. Nobody in their right mind can say that this is not an issue for Australia. This is a watershed moment. What the Prime Minister does and what he says, and hiding behind process, hiding behind convention, hiding behind a particular case is not going to help. And there's not only women that are upset about it, there are many women that are upset about it, but there are a lot of Australians generally from all walks of life, because it affects and impacts them and their families. And I agree that you don't have to be a father to have a conscience. It doesn't mean you got one. And you don't have to ask your wife or you may have you may have girls, right? It doesn't make you any better. It's about having a conscience. Is it a human right or not? And I think it is. And I think the Prime Minister has a clear set of decisions to make here and a clear direction. Either he sticks to this as a political issue, where he's got to protect his Attorney General and he's got to work it politically, or he makes a national statement about the rights of women to feel safe and secure in their home, in their work and out in the street. And that's not what he's doing.
Let's return to that point that Madonna made earlier about victim blaming. Just today we heard that Australia's Defence Chief told new recruits not to make themselves prey to sexual predators by being out late, alone, drunk and, quote, attractive. The ADF has defended the comments, noting the General's intention is to help cadets protect against sexual assault and harassment.
In his view, being aware of the 4 A's, young, attractive people, noting the entire class fell into the risk factor, alcohol, after midnight and alone, enabled the group to recognise and mitigate the threat posed by abusive or predatory individuals.
The Defence Chief's comments were put back to Grace Tame today.
Look, I'm not judge, jury and executioner, but those are that's not helpful rhetoric at all. That feeds the idea that this is something that a victim has to foresee and stop themselves as if they're to blame. And that is really unhelpful.
Austin, you'll have read what Angus Campbell had to say. What are your thoughts?
I don't. When I was first told those comments, when someone was talking to me and explained those comments, my initial reaction was, "Is he still in his job?" Because I don't think that that's appropriate, and I don't think that that's helpful advice in that situation. It's and as others have said, that reinforces this stereotype of somehow it's the victim's fault. We've got to be clear. We've got the people who are doing this are doing the wrong thing, and they just need to stop it. So, yeah, no matter what happens, someone can be completely in that state and all those things. That does not give anyone the right to do it, and that's the message we have to get clear in our society, and the thing we have to change in our culture.
Yeah, this is what you were getting at, Madonna. Can I say that Angus Campbell had real clarity when those war crimes allegations were brought up, showed extraordinary leadership. And then he makes this speech, and this speech is repeated. These ideas are repeated today by the principal of King Koppel Rose Bay, who writes to parents asking them to talk to their daughters about consent, the impact of alcohol, risk-taking behaviours and self-respect. Askham wrote to alumni saying, "We encourage our current parent body to continue to have regular conversations with their daughters about consent, safe partying practices and firm personal boundaries." Loretto Normanhurst, talk to your girls about risk-taking and self-respect. Do you interpret those as all being of a theme there?
Yeah, look, I do. But I think it's the gendered nature of this. I'm not going to let my 16 and 17-year-old daughter walk home at midnight, full stop. But I would hope if I had sons, I would have exactly the same view. I think that these statements
Austin
seem
has
directed...
4 sons and he's shaking his head and said he wouldn't either, righto? Yeah.
No, great. And so I think the fact that these appear directed at females, and I think we should be careful because there are two conversations here. There is one we are having, and we're having in Canberra, and we're having in part of the community, and there is another one that you have just read out happening in big chunks of the community. And if this is to be a watershed moment, then we've got to take everyone with us. I think the idea that any 15 or 16-year-old goes out and gets drunk is something as parents we need to tell them that it dulls their decision making. But the thing where I just, whoa, was when he said you shouldn't make yourself attractive. I mean, that was almost like it's a lure to people. And I think it was a silly thing to say, whether he meant it or not, but it reflects what is happening, as you just read out, in schools and in communities across the country. And we've got to stop that thinking. I don't care if a girl is drunk, it's after midnight, I don't care what she's wearing. No girl ever asks to be raped, and that is an issue on the boys. And we think his teenage behaviour in terms of males and females getting drunk or walking home or through parks or anything else. Does that make sense?
It does.
Interesting.
I think the other issue, and I think, Madonna, I would be probably more forceful with my language. I think the comments were more than silly. And I agree, I actually think Grace Tame was incredibly restrained as well. But I think his comments are dangerous because they quite clearly perpetuate victim blaming, but also it completely overlooks the reality that despite the fact lots of us wanting to believe that rape and sexual assault is something that only happens late at night in dark alleys by some strange person that is lured to you because you are drunk, We know that the vast majority of rapes happen in people's homes. They're perpetrated by people who know the person. It is a myth that rape is just something that happens outside, you know, late at night in the dark. And I think that we need to be really, what I would say to Angus Campbell is, this is not about a lynch mob. None of this is about a lynch mob against a particular person. It is a lynch mob against an issue. And the issue is us accepting that somehow boys and men cannot help but rape women. It might shock people to discover there are a lot of men in this world who have been drunk with women and haven't raped them. Like that has happened a lot.
Look,
it is
and
possible.
Can I say, absolutely, and can I say there's this theme of, you know, men and boys. Most men, most teenage boys are beautiful, respectful, and this doesn't target them, but this whole debate in a way does. And I think also, and that's why I think it's so nuanced in how we approach this and what we do, because we need those boys and men to help navigate a new way forward, to change that culture, whether it's in Parliament House or whether it's in our school grounds.
Ellen, can I say that? I mean, we're Muslim, we don't drink. So the issue of being drunk is not on the table. But I think we should stop talking about what women should not do and what men should do. And there's the issue of respect and not respect. But sexual assault is not about sex.
No.
It's about
So that's
domination.
a point about language, right?
I have problems with the word sexual assault because it makes it feel like you're assaulting someone and it just happens to be sex. Consensual sex is very different to sexual assault, and that sounds silly. But one's about violation, dominance, power, and abuse, and the other, well, we know what that's about.
Intimacy.
But intimacy, love,
connection,
affection,
true.
connection. But it sometimes feels like a silly distinction to make. But it frames the person who's been violated. That language is so limiting. And so we just got to remember, and I really like Angus and I've liked his leadership, but this is something out of the 1950s. You know, I've got daughters who want to be in, not the armed services, but certainly security and government, and it would worry me tremendously for them to stop being attractive. You know, I'm subjective. My daughter's attractive, whatever they wear. You know, but why is that an issue? Why is that an issue?
These conversations can be so hard to have. So if you feel you need to talk, you should call Lifeline on 13 11 14 or 1800 RESPECT 1800 737 732. Well, if the adults in the room are feeling bewildered by the events of recent weeks, even today, imagine what the kids are thinking looking on. As any parent will tell you, nowadays young people are being wrenched from childhood well before their teens. Well, they've never known a world without smartphones, and for many, the digital universe they carry around in their pockets is a gateway to a hyper-sexualised world of unrealistic notions of female beauty with cruel messages and toxic gossip. For her latest book, Madonna King has taken a deep dive into the world not of teenagers, but the new adolescents, aged just 10. She calls them teenagers, and she spoke to 500 of them for this book. Madonna, what happened? I have sons, and I rang the mothers of daughters who said, oh yes, the difference between my 16-year-old at 10, my 13-year-old at 10 and my 10-year-old now is extraordinary. What the heck happened?
It's like a generation. As one school principal said to me, she can remember 10 years ago when these children were born, that they arrived in prams to school assemblies for older sisters, etc. None of them had a dummy. The pacifier was actually an iPad or an iPhone. And this is a generation where that has been their whole world. And what it's done, I think, is just made them so much older, younger, but they're seeing things and reading things that they don't necessarily, well, they definitely don't understand. And the difference now between an 18-year-old when they were 10 and a 10-year-old now is chalk and cheese.
You give pseudonyms to the girls, the 500 10-year-olds you spoke to. Ava is an example. She's 10, you know.
Yeah.
She's 10. You've got a 10-year-old body, right? And she puts on a bathing costume, a two-piece, and she says, I can't wear this because I'm too fat or my stomach is... And she's analysing her stomach and what her knees look like, and she's 10. Why isn't she thinking about unicorns and cuddles, you know?
Absolutely, and that's the problem, because some girls at that age do have a pet unicorn. Some of them have a big sister who might be bisexual. And so those conversations around the schoolyard now in 10-year-old groups is quite phenomenal. And little Ava, I mean, her mother was buying her a bikini, and her view is she has a big rib cage. And I sat with her as she told me the story, and she had 5 or 6 friends with her. And she stood up to show her rib cage, and you know what, Ellen? They're all nodding in agreement. And I'm thinking, well, she's tiny. But around that table, they then decided, they said what was wrong with them. Big teeth, gaps in the teeth, too fat. Overwhelmingly, being tall now at 10 is a really difficult thing. But as school counsellors and psychologists told me, sadly, the girls want to change the things they can't, like their height or the colour of their skin, and their judgment on themselves is just so brutal, so brutal.
Georgie, you have a 10-year-old. Presumably, she doesn't have an older sibling, but whether they were bisexual or whatever their sexuality was wouldn't have any impact on the fact that suddenly she's growing up a heck of a lot quicker than you did, I did. Or you know, older teenagers did. Another thing that Madonna talks about is this real cruelty that seems to go on via social media that perhaps wouldn't happen face to face. The idea of being left on read. READ. I've sent you a text, my friend. I can see that you've read it because it says read, and you haven't responded, and this devastation that results from that.
So I think one of the interesting things about being a parent is that naturally you are learning as you go. And this is the first time that we've had a 10-year-old. So I don't have anything to compare her to, but I do know, and I have read parts of Madonna's book, and it is terrifying and compelling and fascinating. But I guess, and this is probably where I put my hat on as Executive Director of the Parenthood, and we've just recently put out some research that looks into the supports and policies that we have for parents, because I don't think there are many people who disagree that we want to give children the best start in life. But the reality is giving children the best start in life requires time and resources and skills, and it requires being able to access the services that you need when you need them so that you can nurture your children. And I think Australia really lags the rest of the world in the policies that make the most amount of difference to child outcomes. UNICEF last year, I think most people are shocked to learn that Australia ranks 32nd out of 41 developed countries for child wellbeing outcomes.
Wow.
Australia was called out for consistently failing to deliver good quality educational health wellbeing outcomes for children. And I think for a country like Australia, that's quite shocking. And I think it leads to, we can't look at any of these issues in a vacuum. And I think we have to look at the world that children are seeing and what their parents are getting. And if we don't give parents help, how on earth are they meant to navigate this? And I don't have the answers just quietly on TV. Madonna has them.
Talal, 3 daughters. 3 daughters. I want to talk about this idea of resilience, the R word. I mean, sometimes when I hear that, I think, does that just mean toughen up and take a teaspoon of cement? It doesn't. But how do you build resilience in girls when they're getting these messages about what they're meant to look like and all the rest of it?
Well, I've got a 19-year-old, just GTS up the road, just met with an ABC Studios. Outside AB, I've got a 16-year-old doing her IB, HSC, matriculation, and I've got a 13-year-old. And the thing about children is they're all beautiful and different, and they keep astounding me because I think they're one thing, but they turn out to be the other. The soft, cuddly one's really the tough and go get them, and the one I think is not so involved in, as much as not so extroverted, is actually a true leader. And so that's the way you build resilience. You support them, you let them build, but you let them fail. That's what we don't do in society. Our rules are very simple. If you fail, we tell you failed. You've done badly. Did you work hard? Yes. But you still failed the test. You're entitled to nothing. But you still failed. But tomorrow you get another shot.
Yeah. Let me go to Austin. We're short on time, Austin, but country kids, broad generalisation, but nevertheless, this is what Madonna was sort of generally finding, fared better. She talked to Mount Isa principal Haneen Frick, who said, look, it could be weather-induced, watching the life cycle, animals live and die, but somehow country kids generally have got a better, girls have got a better handle on things. What do you think of that?
Well, interesting to know, and I haven't spent a lot of time in the city, so I probably don't have a good thing to compare to, but I've always thought that small communities is a very strong support. The old cliche of it takes a village to raise a child, but when the times that I've spent in larger towns compared to in smaller towns, the people that kids go to school, those are the same parents. Those kids play football or a different sport, and I see them there, and I'll see them at the music club or whatever else. It's that regularity of contact. Whereas living in a big city, the people I played footy with, I never saw anywhere else. They weren't the people I went to school with. They weren't the people I went to church with. I think that that sort of repetitive meeting and I think that helps.
You've also talked about taking your boys away with male friends and relatives and young fellas and sitting around the campfire. What's the value of that?
Yep. So that's an idea I got from a Steve Biddett book.
Right.
He talks about that at some stage your kids are going to want to look to other role models. So you can either just let that happen organically, or you can try and surround them with people that you would want them to go to. Again, in a small town, they're generally people you know, so it's the football coach who you also happen to work with or something like that. So, but that's the idea of doing that. And the other one was John Eldridge, who wrote a book called Wild at Heart, a Christian writer, talking about that boys are a bit like a knife. They can be dangerous if used wrong, but we all have knives in our house and we use them to cut up our food and make wonderful food and do great things with them. And that's an attitude to take with the boys, and I've got 4 boys, of they are who they are. Don't try and change them, but channel them to use their skills and abilities for good.
And last word on girls. Madonna, you talked to the wonderful Paulina Skirman, often a guest on the program, principal here in Sydney. How do you make it slow down? How do you make growing up slow down?
Just put the smartphone away. Take them camping.
Social media.
Boys or girls, sit around the fireplace. Get off social media. It's not even legal till they're 13. So why they're on it at 10, it's just not needed, Ellen.
Wonderful. It is a terrific book. We could do another 20 minutes on it, but I feel like we did a whole program on it, and that was a positive note at the end. Thank you so much for the book, Madonna. Teenager.
Thank you.
What your daughters need to know about the transition from child to teen. That's all we have time for. Our thanks to the panel, Georgie, Dent, Talal, Yassine, Madonna King and Austin Evans. Have a great evening, and Jules is in tomorrow night. Good night to you.